Well, welcome to the 700 Club. A shocking terrorist attack today in Paris, France, with at least a dozen people dead. Two masked gunmen attacked a newspaper office. They shouted Allahu Akbar as they stormed the building. It was the deadliest terror attack in France in at least 2 decades. That paper, by the way, had just published a cartoon mocking the leader of the Islamic terrorist group called ISIS. Well, joining us now with more is author Joel Rosenberg, who's just written a new book, published yesterday, I believe, just come out. It's called The Third Target. And he's talking about what ISIS would do if they got hold of weapons of mass destruction. Joel, thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you, Pat. Thank you. What's
the deal on this thing in Paris? What do you know about it?
Well, the satirical newspaper had been mocking Prophet Muhammad. It had just published a cartoon mocking the leader of the Islamic State, ISIS, Abu Baghdadi. And the cartoon basically is a New Year's announcement by the ISIS leader saying good health to everyone, even though they are cutting off the heads of people, enslaving children, and massacring. So it is a terrorist attack, as you said, the worst in France in many, many years. And it's evidence that ISIS is moving. They are not going to stay contained in the Middle East.
Well, now, in this attack, were the terrorists killed or did they get away?
They got away. It's 2, maybe 3. I saw a video this morning of somebody shooting from a rooftop of them jumping in a car and driving off. So the good news is there was video of the car. So there's an all-points bulletin. They're on very heightened alert right now.
All right. Now, you've written a book. You've been very prescient in terms of stuff that you've written. The Defense Department wonders if you got an insight into their computers. But The Third Target, how come you wrote this book?
Well, The Third Target is really looking at what I thought was the next concern for the West and the United States, and that is ISIS, this Islamic State. Now, when I began writing it, even my publisher had not heard of ISIS, and we all wondered maybe I should write about a fictional terror group. But as I sat down with former CIA Director Jim Woolsey from the Clinton years, former CIA Director Porter Goss from the Bush years, a former head of Mossad, they all said ISIS is what's coming. And if you're going to write a book about the dangers that are coming, it's this Al-Qaeda morphing into something worse.
How come the president was surprised? He seemed to be surprised if 2 CIA, former heads of the CIA and the head of Mossad, with oral warning, didn't he get briefings on that?
Well, as you know, he skipped a lot of those briefings. No, he did. I'm not trying to make a partisan point. It's a factual point. Yes, it was a year ago today, January 7th, that he gave an interview, the president gave an interview with The New Yorker. Right. And he said in that interview, which was published a few days later, that ISIS was a JV team. It was not a serious player, and that Al-Qaeda was on the run. I was already deep into writing The Third Target. I knew that was not the case. But I will admit that I didn't expect ISIS to become as big a threat, maybe for another 4 or 5 years.
Well, they were driving pickup trucks, for heaven's sakes, with machine guns, and they swept over Iraq. It was totally illogical. I couldn't understand it.
Well, the story inside The Third Target, again, this is a novel, but it's a novel about a New York Times foreign correspondent who hears a rumor that ISIS has captured chemical weapons inside Syria. So he asks his editor if he can go interview the commander. The editor says no. The reporter goes anyway. And what sets into motion is me being able to take the reader inside this world of ISIS. And ISIS is already trying to bring down the Syrian government. They're already trying to bring down the Iraqi government. So the question becomes, what is the next target? What is the third target? Is it the United States? Is it a European capital? Is it Israel? Or is there a moderate Arab state that, where are they heading next? And I don't know if it's limited to a third. I think they have multiple targets.
Well, you have your protagonists in here, ISIS players, and fictional or otherwise, they're debating where to go next. Is that it?
They're not debating. The reporter's trying to figure out where they're trying to head. And so it's a bit of a journey, because clearly they're preparing to attack on multiple fronts. But in the novel, they do capture chemical weapons. And so they're not just talking about a general attack, they're talking about a genocidal attack. I even got invited to come and sit down in Jordan with the Prime Minister of Jordan, the Foreign Minister, the Interior Minister, because I wanted to understand how Arab leaders see this emerging threat. The Interior Minister said, is this going to be like a Tom Clancy novel. I said, I hope so. He said, good, sit down, take notes. And we sat down for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and he said, the king has appointed me to make sure that your scenario never comes true in our country.
Okay.
Because Jordan is very worried.
Yes,
if Jordan gets taken down, if the king gets attacked and destroyed inside Jordan, you will have ISIS on the border of Jerusalem. And this is just a nightmare scenario.
Well, they also are threatening, you know, this oil thing is going on in Saudi Arabia, you know, that Ras Tanura field and those ports and so forth on the Gulf are so open to attack. And so ISIS, they're prime targets for ISIS. They
are. And what concerns me, Pat, is the complacency inside the White House. This idea first that ISIS was not a big deal, that Al-Qaeda was being destroyed, that we could pull all of our forces out of Iraq when even the president's defense secretaries, 2 of them, were telling him this is not a good idea. It's too early. Don't do it. Even Secretary Clinton was saying, don't do this. I mean, you know, I'm not a big fan of her foreign policy, but she was at least saying this is a bad idea. President did it anyway. And he still seems complacent to this threat. Unfortunately, Paris reminds us that this isn't fiction, that these guys are coming, and I'm concerned that they're coming here to the United States.
What do you think about, you know, the whole attitude toward ISIS? He said, as I recall, that this was not an Islamic group. Didn't he say that?
He said this, well, in effect. I mean, he's saying this is not a problem with Islam. The King of Jordan disagrees. He said this is a third world war, and this is Islam's problem. Not to say that all Muslims buy into ISIS, but clearly the Islamic State is Islamic. I mean, it sees itself as Islamic. It doesn't really matter whether anyone else sees it. It sees itself as being driven by radical Islam. And I think people are getting exhausted by the threat of radical Islam. But as I make a point throughout many of my books, you and I have talked about it, if you misunderstand the nature and threat of evil, you risk being blindsided by it. And if we get our eye off the ball, Iran is the biggest threat in the region. Radical Islam trying to build nuclear weapons. ISIS trying to capture chemical and biological weapons. But as you know, they're committing genocide even without chemical weapons. I mean, we have genocidal conditions in Syria and Iraq. Christians are being murdered. They want to kill Jews in Israel. But really, it's Muslims who are dying most right now. And we've got to have a Western alliance that's decisive. And right now, we just do not.
The leader of Egypt, Al-Sisi, is a terrific guy, I think. And he came out just recently and said, look, we've got to examine this whole idea of Islam, what it is. It's repugnant throughout the earth.
I think the president of Egypt, first of all, he's an authoritarian. He has some issues on human rights.
Well,
however, compared to the head of the Muslim Brotherhood running the country, we're not even close. The United States should be working with Iraq, with Iraq, but with Egypt, Jordan, the Saudis, and Israel. That is an unnaturally emerging alliance against Iran and against radical Sunni Islam. And yet the president won't pursue that.
Anybody in the government who thinks strategically that is the natural strategic alliance? The Saudis have made noises in that direction. The Egyptians have made it, but we won't pick up on it. What is it?
It's the president. I mean, you know, I think if you had different leaders in office, you'd have people saying, look, I know personally that a key member of the Congress sat with El-Sisi, and he told me, I can't name the member of the Congress, but he said, I just sat with El-Sisi. He told me that he's got a better relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel than with President Obama.
Good.
Now I'm glad that relationship is building between Egypt and Israel, but it's something serious when the President of the United States, whoever that would be, doesn't understand who our allies are emerging. Again, we wouldn't have thought the Saudis would be an ally against radical Islam. 19 Saudis hit us on 9/11. But things have changed, and the president does not seem to understand it. Unfortunately, we've got 2 more years, at least, of this particular president, for sure. And even though 2016 is building up, we have to deal with the president we have now.
Well, Joel, I hope this book it sounds fascinating. And ladies and gentlemen, it's available where books are sold. It's just released. It's called The Third Target. If you like Joel's work, I mean, you've got a gorgeous Mossad agent being taken over by New York Times. The other way around. I mean, the New York Times reporter is in the thrall of the Mossad agent. Great story.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here.
Great to see you.
God bless you. Joel Rosenberg. It's called The Third Target, just out. You can get a copy and enjoy it. Well, speaking of ISIS, Islamic State in Syria or in the Levant or whatever, the terrorist plot has been uncovered also in Israel. And we're bringing more of that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington.
Israel's Shin Bet security agency has arrested 3 Palestinians who had formed an ISIS terror cell in the West Bank city of Hebron. The agency says the 3 had reportedly planned to murder an Israeli soldier and use his weapon and uniform to carry out a terror attack. They also confessed to assembling bombs for their foiled plot. This is the first case made public of ISIS in Israel. The would-be terrorists reportedly did not have direct contact with outside forces, but followed the group's ideology. One report said the Israeli military is concerned that ISIS videos are having a growing influence on Palestinians. Well, the Palestinians will join the International Criminal Court beginning in April. This would mean they could bring war crimes charges against Israel. This would also affect the chances of an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. Israel responded by freezing more than $100 million in tax funds collected for the Palestinian Authority. The U.S. also opposed the move and said it would review its annual $440 million aid package to the Palestinians. The move could also backfire on the Palestinians as well, because they could be accused of war crimes for Hamas rocket attacks on Israel and other violence against Jewish targets. Pat?
This whole thing is outrageous, and I think the United States, don't just talk about reviewing the thing, do something about it. And just say, look, guys, no more money. Cut off their money. The Palestinian Authority is a joke. And Mahmoud Abbas, he looked like a nice, avuncular type of man, and he was going to be a peaceful man. He's anything but. I met several times with Yasser Arafat, who was, a real terrorist. But in person, he couldn't be nicer. But Abbas has been just as bad as Hamas. And it's time we stop giving them money. And the world community has got to stop giving them money. But the idea of letting them get into the United Nations criminal system and then begin charging against Israel, but it's a two-edged sword, and they've got a lot of blood on their hands. John?
Pat, here in Washington, the first day of the new Congress brought the first clash between President Obama and Republican leaders. It came just moments after Republicans took control of the Senate. The White House immediately vowed to veto their first bill, a measure approving the construction of the long-stalled Keystone oil pipeline. Another top priority for the GOP, scaling back Obamacare. Republicans want to change the law's definition of a work week, bumping it from 40 hours to 30 hours. That's because so many employers have slashed worker hours to avoid paying for health care. The first black Republican woman elected to Congress is just one of many who say they will push to replace Obamacare.
Look, I was elected by my district to make sure that we get the decision-making back in their hands, and I said that I was going to do everything I can to repeal and replace it with something that is functional and get with broad health care reforms, free market health care reforms, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
President Obama has vowed to block any attempt to repeal his signature health care law. Pat?
Well, again, the Republicans are doing it just the way they should. They're taking incremental steps, finding those areas which are very unpopular with the American people, and they say, let's change these. And every time Obama vetoes that, he's going to dig himself deeper and deeper in the hole. But they have misstated the effects of the Keystone Pipeline. They have misstated the economic benefits, the number of people employed, the overall impact in terms of energy security. I mean, it's a no-brainer, and it's been cleared by the State Department, cleared over and over again, and Obama is catering to a small coterie of radical environmentalists. And now, without question, there's a veto-proof majority in the Senate and the House to get this thing through, and I think jam it at him. That's the way to do it. John?
Pat, former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell is facing a 2-year prison sentence. That's far less than the 10-year sentence prosecutors had been seeking. McDonnell was found guilty on 11 counts of public corruption. After the sentence was handed down, McDonnell apologized for his mistakes, but said he did not violate his oath of office and will continue to fight to prove his innocence.
Most importantly, I want to say that I have immense faith in the justice system, but I have tremendous faith and trust in the providence of the Lord Jesus Christ and his ability to mete out justice, and so that is my hope for ultimate vindication.
Pat, in addition to the prison time, McDonnell will serve 2 years of probation. His wife was convicted on 8 counts of corruption, and Pat, she will be sentenced February 20th.
I haven't had a chance to talk at length in this program about what's going on because he was in trial and I didn't want to get in the way. In Virginia, there is no law against a public official receiving gifts from a supporter. No law whatsoever, so long as those gifts are disclosed on various forms that are made available to them. No law against it. Nothing wrong. No law. Now, if on the other hand, an official is bribed and gives favors, that's something else. But the only thing they could go against Bob McDonnell for was that he used his office, his office, to assist a local businessman who also along the way gave some gifts and loans. Well, used his office. He didn't give him any office. He didn't appoint him to any commission. There was no federal or state funds that went into this man's hands. Nothing whatsoever. And yet, in this contrived system, because here's the deal, Bob McDonnell was a potential candidate for the United States Senate. Turned out that he probably would have won in this last election because he was so well known if he'd been left alone. From there, he was a potential, I don't think they say presidential, I think he was a potential vice presidential contender. He was high on the list. He was a rising star in the Republican Party, and the Justice Department decided to go after him, and it was just terrible. And sure, he made mistakes. He's like Adam, you know. The Eve was the one that got seduced by the snake, but Adam ate the fruit. And I think Bob McDonnell got seduced. His wife was into this anti-block thing that supposedly would be a cure-all from using tobacco. And the man who testified against them, however, was under observation for securities fraud. And he was given blanket immunity from everything. So they said, you testify against this sitting Republican governor, and we will give you a blank slate against anything you've done, whether it's securities or whatever it is that you may have done wrong. You have a blanket immunity. And yet, he was the principal witness against Bob McDonnell. But now we understand that he's going to appeal, but nevertheless, considering what they were looking at, they were talking about 10 years. The fact that he got two years, the judge said, look, there's just no way I can assess a sentence of that magnitude in relation to what he's done. But it's questionable. It's questionable given the fact that it was the Hobbs Act, a federal act that they prosecuted him under, and a tenuous understanding of the Hobbs Act. But in terms of Virginia law, there was no law broken that I am aware of. John?
Pat, millions of Americans face record snowfalls and record low temperatures with dangerous wind chills today. The winter weather is closing schools from Chicago to Minneapolis and the Dakotas, with Arctic air even in the deep south. Mark Martin has the story.
More than half the country finds itself covered in snow and locked in a deep freeze today.
When I wake up, it's snowing. Fall asleep, it's snowing. The worst part, I think, is probably driving in it.
Ice and snow wreaked havoc on roads from the Midwest to the East Coast, leading to dangerous pileups. Law enforcement even shut down an interstate in central Indiana because of so many accidents. In Minnesota, stalled, spun-out cars crashed into medians and highway shoulders. In our nation's capital, there was almost a whiteout at the White House. School buses slid off streets in Virginia.
The bus never showed up because we are at the top of a hill.
Dozens of school districts across the Midwest are closed because of the dangerous temperatures, with wind chills expected to plunge as low as 50 below zero in some areas.
The kind of North Stars that guide us, health and safety of the children, and enough planning time for the parents to make the adjustments if they're needed.
Those that do have to venture outside pile on the layers.
My fingers are a little frozen after the first 5 minutes.
In Fargo, North Dakota, construction workers who have to work outside are concerned about sweating.
For me, fighting the sweat is the biggest issue because that freezes. I'll spray my feet and such with antiperspirant so it doesn't sweat as much.
It's so cold in some areas, the road salt is having no effect on the icy highways. In Chicago, they've used fire to warm up train tracks. Mark Martin, CBN News.
And Pat, I know you have it made there in Virginia Beach.
Of course we have it made. It's warm and toasty. It's going to be, I think, 16 tomorrow or something in the morning, or 18.
Have it made, John. It's not like we're living in the tropics down here.
It's like palm trees, palm trees.
My Arctic coat on this morning.
Yeah, we get the Gulf Stream. It's lovely. Everybody should move to Virginia Beach. It
was minus 40 wind chill in the Dakotas.
It's cold. Wow. I've been up there. You know, I was campaigning.
Have you ever experienced minus 40? I don't think I have.
I've experienced, I think, minus 25. But I was, I think Spirit Lake, Iowa. I was campaigning up there, and I think it was about minus 40 or minus 50 wind chill. You don't notice it. Seriously, I mean, you just don't notice it. It's dry. And it's
dry.
But you go out there for about 10 minutes, and the next thing you know, the tissue of your face has turned to ice, and you're in serious trouble. But hey, listen, you have our sincere best wishes. I hope you all stay warm, and please be careful and be healthy. But also come to Virginia Beach. It's lovely, and we'd love to have you. You're always welcome. As they say in the South, if you all come here. Okay, John.
Pat, turning to health news, 6 Americans die every day from drinking too much alcohol. And to the surprise of health officials, most of the deaths involve middle-aged adults, not teens or college kids. The report from the Centers for Disease Control found that 3/4 of the deaths came from adults between 35 and 64 years old. The researchers focused on people who died after a single episode of binge drinking. Too much alcohol can shut down areas of the brain that control breathing, heart rate, and body temperature. Pat, middle-aged adults, I think that comes as a surprise to most.
It should, and you know, they talk about marijuana being so evil, and they got to put people in jail for smoking it or possessing it. But I tell you, alcohol is a drug that is much more pervasive, and it does terrible things to people.
The new Republican-controlled Congress is wasting no time to advance the GOP's pro-life stance. Republicans passed the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act in the last session of Congress, but that's as far as it went with Democrats in control of the Senate. Now, with a change in leadership, 2 House lawmakers have reintroduced the bill. It would ban abortions after the first 20 weeks of pregnancy. Congressman Trent Franks, one of the bill's sponsors, says these are innocent, defenseless children who can not only feel pain and can survive outside of the womb in most cases, but are torturously killed without even basic anesthesia. Well, more than 9 in 10 of the new members of the 114th Congress sworn in this week identify themselves as Christian. The Pew Research Center reports about 57% of the House and Senate is Protestant and 31% is Catholic. There's a higher percentage of Protestants and Catholics in Congress than in the overall U.S. population. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.